Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of the ocean's most mesmerizing secrets, the glowing rain that falls endlessly through the midnight zone, where creatures create their own stars in a world that has never seen sunlight, and you definitely wouldn't survive this journey without some serious pressure equipment, but that's exactly why we're taking this trip together from the comfort of your bed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I always love seeing how this community spans the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself suspended in the ocean's twilight realm, 2,000 feet beneath the surface, where the last whispers of sunlight have long since faded into memory. And here in this liquid space that feels more like outer space than Earth, you're witnessing something that would make any Christmas light display look absolutely amateur. The midnight zone stretches around you like a living cathedral of darkness, but it's not truly dark at all, because everywhere you look, pinpricks of blue and green light pulse and flicker like a slow-motion fireworks show that never ends. These aren't stars you're seeing. They're the bodies of creatures that have learned to paint with light, in a world where darkness should reign supreme. You watch as a jellyfish the size of a dinner plate drifts past, its translucent bell rimmed with lights that pulse in a rhythm that seems almost musical, each flash sending ripples of bioluminescence through the water like dropping stones into a phosphorescent pond. The science behind what you're observing is both elegant and brutal. These creatures have evolved to create light through a chemical reaction that combines a compound called luciferin with an enzyme called luciferase, the same basic process that fireflies use, but adapted for an environment where the pressure would crush your bones and the cold would stop your heart in minutes. Around you, the water itself seems alive with sparkles as microscopic organisms react to every movement, every current, every vibration, with bursts of light that create trails and patterns, like someone drawing with glow sticks in 3 dimensions. You're seeing dinoflagellates and other tiny plankton that have turned their entire existence into a light show, each one no bigger than a pinhead, but collectively creating displays that can be seen from space when they bloom near the surface. The ancient Greeks actually wrote about seas that glowed at night, thinking it was the breath of sea gods, and honestly, when you're floating here watching this ethereal dance, you can understand why they reached for supernatural explanations. Researchers still argue about whether bioluminescence evolved primarily for communication, defense, or hunting, but down here in the midnight zone, it seems to serve all 3 purposes, as you watch a small fish flash what looks like Morse code to potential mates, while simultaneously startling a predator with a burst of light that creates the perfect distraction for escape. The energy cost of producing this light is enormous for these creatures. They're literally burning calories to create photons in a place where every calorie counts for survival, which makes their commitment to illumination all the more remarkable. You notice how the light patterns change as you drift deeper, the blues becoming more dominant as red wavelengths struggle to penetrate even this far down, and you realize you're witnessing an entire ecosystem that has reinvented the very concept of visibility. These creatures have become their own suns in a place where no sun has ever shone, creating a parallel universe of light that exists in the permanent midnight of the deep ocean. And as you settle into this gentle descent through their glowing realm, you can feel the ancient rhythm of the sea beginning to slow your breathing and ease your mind towards sleep. You continue your descent and notice something that looks like snow falling around you, except the snow glows with a soft ethereal light and falls so slowly it seems almost suspended in the thick water, each flake a tiny constellation, drifting downward in the most patient journey on Earth. This is marine snow, though calling it snow feels almost too simple for something so magical. These are the remains of life from the ocean's surface, mixed with countless microscopic organisms, all bound together in delicate aggregates that tumble through the water column like luminous confetti, celebrating the endless cycle of life and death in the sea. You watch as these glowing particles drift past your observation point, some no bigger than dust motes, others the size of golf balls, each one carrying its own faint light as bacteria and other bioluminescent creatures hitchhike on this slow elevator right to the ocean floor. The journey these particles are taking is epic in the most literal sense. They began their descent from the sunlit surface waters, where phytoplankton bloomed and died, where copepods molted their shells and fish shed their scales, where the entire bustling ecosystem of the upper ocean contributed to this gentle precipitation that never stops falling. The speed of marine snow's descent would make a sloth look hyperactive. Most particles fall at a rate of about 50 to 200 meters per day, which means the glowing flake you're watching right now might have started its journey from the surface weeks or even months ago. During that impossibly slow fall, these particles have become entire ecosystems unto themselves. Bacteria colonize them and feast on their organic matter. Small copepods graze on them like underwater cattle, and by the time they reach the deep ocean floor, they've been transformed and retransformed dozens of times over. You observe how some of the larger marine snow aggregates pulse with light in irregular patterns, and you realize you're watching microscopic drama unfold as predators hunt prey within these tiny floating worlds, each flash of bioluminescence marking a moment of triumph or terror on a scale so small you need to imagine it rather than see it directly. The bacteria responsible for much of this light are responding to the mechanical stress of being jostled and compressed as larger organisms feed on their marine snow habitat, turning each feeding event into a tiny light show that adds to the overall luminescence of this underwater blizzard. Ancient mariners sometimes reported seas that looked like they were filled with liquid starlight, and now you understand they were likely witnessing massive marine snow events near the surface, though they had no way of knowing that what they saw was just the beginning of a journey that would continue for months in the deep ocean below their ships. The romantic poets would have lost their minds if they could see what you're seeing now, this endless gentle snowfall in a realm where snow should be impossible, each glowing particle carrying stories from the surface world down to the creatures of the abyss who depend on this rain of nutrients for their very survival. Researchers still argue about how much of the ocean's carbon cycle depends on marine snow transport versus other mechanisms, but as you watch this luminous precipitation continue its patient journey toward the sea floor, you can sense that you're witnessing one of the planet's most important and least understood processes. The deep ocean creatures waiting thousands of feet below depend on this glowing snow for food. It's literally manna from heaven for organisms that live in a world where photosynthesis is impossible and every meal is a gift from the distant surface. You find yourself mesmerized by the rhythm of the falling particles, the way they swirl and dance in the deep currents, and you notice how your own breathing has begun to match their unhurried pace as you drift among them like an observer in the universe's most patient and beautiful snowstorm. You drift closer to examine one of the marine snow particles, and suddenly the water around you explodes in brilliant blue light. as if someone just set off a flashbulb in the depths, and you realize you've disturbed a cluster of dinoflagellates, those microscopic organisms that transform from invisible drifters into nature's most sensitive alarm system at the slightest provocation. These single-celled creatures are the ocean's ultimate introverts, perfectly content to drift along unnoticed until something bumps them, brushes them, or even creates a pressure wave near them, at which point they respond with a burst of bioluminescence so bright it can startle predators 10 times their size. You watch the light fade gradually around you, and in that fading glow you can appreciate the elegant simplicity of what just happened. Each dinoflagellate contains tiny organelles called scintillons that store luciferin and luciferase separately until mechanical disturbance causes them to mix, creating light in a reaction that takes less than 1/10 of a second but can be seen for several seconds afterward. It's like each microscopic organism carries its own personal firework that it sets off whenever it feels threatened, and considering that a single liter of seawater can contain millions of these creatures, you're essentially swimming through a minefield of potential light shows. The evolutionary genius of this system becomes apparent as you observe how effectively it works. When a small fish swims through a dense patch of dinoflagellates, it lights up like a neon sign, making it incredibly visible to any larger predators lurking nearby, which means the dinoflagellates have essentially conscripted every creature in the ocean into their defense network. It's the biological equivalent of a car alarm that makes so much noise it brings the entire neighborhood running, except in this case the noise is light, and the neighborhood includes some very large and very hungry residents of the deep. You notice how different species of dinoflagellates create different patterns of light. Some flash once and fade quickly, while others pulse repeatedly, like biological strobe lights, and some even create expanding rings of luminescence that ripple outward from the point of disturbance, like dropping a stone into a pond made of liquid starlight. The diversity of their light shows would make any pyrotechnician jealous, and they've been perfecting these displays for millions of years longer than humans have even existed. The ancient phenomenon of milky seas, where entire stretches of ocean glow with a steady ghostly light, was likely caused by massive blooms of bioluminescent dinoflagellates, and sailors who witnessed these events reported seas that looked like liquid moonlight stretching to the horizon. Modern satellite imagery has actually confirmed that these Milky Sea events still occur, sometimes covering areas larger than Connecticut with a persistent blue-white glow that can be seen from space, though you'd need to be very unlucky to encounter one while swimming at night. Researchers still argue about whether the primary function of dinoflagellate bioluminescence is predator deterrence, mate attraction, or something else entirely. But as you watch another small disturbance trigger a cascade of flashing lights that spreads through the water like wildfire, the defensive function seems pretty obvious. These microscopic organisms have turned the entire ocean into a burglar alarm system where any movement triggers a light that says, "Hey, something's happening over here," to every predator in the vicinity. You find yourself moving more slowly and deliberately through the water, partly out of respect for these tiny light makers, and partly because you're discovering that the gentler your movements, the more subtle and beautiful the resulting displays become, like learning to paint with light using the ocean itself as your canvas, and millions of microscopic organisms as your willing collaborators. You glide deeper through the bioluminescent snowstorm, following the gentle cascade of glowing marine particles, when a shape emerges from the darkness ahead that looks like something from an alien nightmare, but moves with the grace of a ballet dancer, and you find yourself face to face with a vampire squid, though despite its ominous name, this ancient creature is about as threatening as a floating silk scarf, and infinitely more spectacular. The vampire squid drifts toward you with its arms trailing behind like the train of an elaborate gown, and as it senses your presence, it begins one of the most remarkable light shows you'll ever witness in the deep ocean. You watch in fascination as the creature turns itself inside out, literally everting its body to display hundreds of bioluminescent photophores that cover its surface like tiny LED lights, creating patterns that pulse and swirl across its translucent flesh in waves of blue and gold luminescence. This isn't just random flashing. You're witnessing a carefully choreographed performance where each light serves a specific purpose. Some photophores flash in rapid sequences to confuse predators, while others glow steadily to communicate with potential mates, and the overall effect is like watching a living constellation rearrange itself in 3 dimensions. The vampire squid you're observing is a living fossil, a creature that has remained virtually unchanged for over 300 million years, surviving mass extinctions that wiped out countless other species by adapting to life in the oxygen minimum zone, where few other large organisms can survive. Unlike the aggressive hunters you might expect from something with vampire in its name, this gentle creature feeds primarily on marine snow, using specialized filaments to collect those same glowing particles you watched falling earlier, making it more like an underwater butterfly than a bloodthirsty predator. You notice how the creature's bioluminescent display changes as it moves through different types of marine snow, the patterns becoming more intense when it encounters denser concentrations of food particles, and you realize you're watching a form of communication that evolved long before any vertebrate walked on land. The vampire squid is essentially broadcasting its feeding success to other members of its species, letting them know where the good dining can be found in this vast underwater desert, where a good meal can be hundreds of miles away. The photophores covering the vampire squid's body are controlled by a complex nervous system that can create light patterns faster than your eyes can follow, each one a tiny window into an alien intelligence that processes information about pressure, chemicals, vibrations, and bioluminescent signals from other creatures in ways that would make our most advanced computers seem primitive. When threatened, the vampire squid can eject clouds of bioluminescent mucus that create decoy light shows, while the animal itself disappears into the darkness, a trick that would make any magician proud. Ancient sailors' tales of sea monsters glowing in the depths might have been inspired by encounters with large vampire squids near the surface during storms, and honestly, if you saw one of these creatures putting on its full light show in turbulent water without knowing what it was, you'd probably invent some pretty creative explanations yourself. The way they can appear and disappear in flashes of light, combined with their ability to change shape so dramatically, would definitely fuel some vivid maritime folklore. Researchers still argue about how vampire squids navigate in the pitch darkness of their deep ocean habitat, whether they rely primarily on bioluminescent signals from other organisms, pressure waves, or some other sensory system we haven't fully understood yet, but watching this graceful creature maneuver through the falling marine snow with such precision, you can tell it's perfectly at home in this alien environment. You find yourself wondering what it would be like to experience the world through senses designed for eternal darkness, to communicate through patterns of light, and to spend your entire existence drifting through a universe where up and down are just suggestions, and every meal is a gift from far above. You continue following the vampire squid's graceful dance when you notice something that makes you pause and really focus your attention. The sea floor far below is beginning to glow with a different kind of light, not the sudden flashes of startled dinoflagellates or the elegant displays of passing creatures, but a steady persistent luminescence that spreads across the bottom like a vast network of underwater streetlights. You're witnessing one of the ocean's most sophisticated communication systems, bacterial colonies that have learned to coordinate their bioluminescence across enormous distances, creating what scientists call quorum sensing networks that turn the deep sea floor into a living circuit board. You drift closer to observe this bacterial metropolis and realize that what looks like random twinkling is actually highly organized. These microscopic organisms are counting each other through chemical signals and only beginning their light show when their population reaches a critical mass, essentially taking a census before deciding whether to illuminate their neighborhood. The bacteria wait until they have enough neighbors to make their bioluminescent investment worthwhile, like a city that only turns on its streetlights when enough residents are home to appreciate them. Except these residents are single-celled organisms, and their streetlights are powered by biochemistry that would make any engineer jealous. The patterns you're seeing spread across the sea floor in waves that can travel for miles, as bacterial colonies communicate information about food availability, water chemistry, and potential threats through pulses of light that ripple from community to community like biological telegraph signals. Each flash represents millions of individual bacteria making the collective decision to burn precious energy creating photons, and the coordination required for these displays suggests a level of microbial intelligence that challenges everything we thought we knew about single-celled life. You watch as areas of the sea floor suddenly dim while others brighten, and you realize you're observing bacterial colonies responding to changes in their environment, perhaps reacting to the gentle rain of marine snow you saw earlier, or adjusting to shifts in ocean currents that bring new nutrients or wash away waste products. The bacteria are essentially having conversations through light, debates about resource allocation and territorial boundaries conducted in a language of bioluminescent pulses that evolved billions of years before human speech. Some of the bacterial mats you're observing have been glowing continuously for decades, maybe centuries, creating underwater beacons that serve as navigation points for deep-sea creatures in much the same way that lighthouses guide ships. And you wonder how many lost fish have found their way home by following these bacterial light networks. The energy cost of maintaining these displays must be enormous. Yet the bacteria continue their luminous vigil year after year, suggesting that the benefits of this underwater internet far outweigh the metabolic expense. The ancient concept of foxfire, the mysterious lights that appeared in swamps and forests at night, was likely caused by similar bacterial bioluminescence on land, and now you can appreciate how those eerie glows must have seemed supernatural to people who had no concept of microbiology. Watching these bacterial cities conduct their silent symphony of light, you can understand how easy it would be to attribute such organized beauty to supernatural forces, rather than the collective intelligence of trillions of microscopic organisms. Researchers still argue about how bacterial quorum sensing evolved, and whether these light networks serve functions we haven't discovered yet, perhaps even playing roles in global ocean chemistry or climate regulation that we're only beginning to understand. The bacteria you are watching have been perfecting their light-based communication system since long before complex life existed on Earth, making them the planet's original masters of bioluminescent technology. You find yourself hypnotized by the slow pulse of light across the bacterial landscape, the way the illumination ebbs and flows like breathing, and you notice that your own breathing has synchronized with these ancient rhythms as you float above this underwater constellation that has been conducting its luminous conversations since before continents formed their current shapes. You begin to ascend from the bacterial light networks when the water around you starts to thicken with translucent shapes that pulse and undulate like living glass, and suddenly you find yourself surrounded by what can only be described as a galaxy of jellyfish, thousands upon thousands of them drifting together in a massive bloom that stretches as far as your eyes can penetrate the deep blue darkness. Each jellyfish is a living constellation. Their translucent bells, rimmed with bioluminescent organs that flash in coordinated waves, creating a synchronized light show that makes the bacterial displays below seem like mere warm-up acts for this aquatic symphony of illumination. You drift among these gelatinous travelers and notice how their bioluminescent displays seem to respond to each other. When one jellyfish flashes its lights in a particular pattern, nearby individuals pick up the signal and relay it through the bloom like a wave at a baseball stadium, except this wave is made of living creatures and travels through 3 dimensions instead of just across stadium seats. The coordination is so precise it suggests these jellyfish are operating as a single superorganism, sharing information about currents, food sources, and potential dangers through their synchronized flashing. The jellyfish surrounding you are moon jellies, each one about the size of a dinner plate but weighing almost nothing. Their bodies composed of 95% water with just enough biological machinery to create these mesmerizing light displays. You watch as they pulse through the water with a rhythm that seems almost hypnotic, their movements so gentle and deliberate that you can feel your own heartbeat beginning to slow in sympathy with their ancient dance, and you will realize these creatures have been perfecting this choreography for over 600 million years. The bioluminescence you're witnessing serves multiple purposes in this jellyfish metropolis. Some flashes are alarm calls that spread through the bloom when predators approach. Others are mating signals that help individuals find partners in the crowded galaxy of potential mates, and still others seem to be navigation beacons that help the entire bloom maintain its cohesion as it drifts through the ocean currents. It's like watching an entire city communicate through coordinated fireworks, except the city is alive and floating and has been using this communication system since before vertebrates evolved spines. You notice how the light patterns change as the bloom encounters different conditions. When they drift through a patch of nutrient-rich water, the flashing becomes more frequent and intense, like a celebration of abundance, while in areas where food is scarce, the displays become more subdued and energy efficient. The jellyfish are essentially broadcasting their metabolic state through light, letting other members of the bloom know where the good feeding can be found and where they might want to avoid wasting energy. The phenomenon of massive jellyfish blooms has been recorded throughout human history, with ancient Chinese texts describing seas that glowed with jellyfish light, and medieval European chronicles reporting waters so thick with luminous jellies that ships had difficulty navigating through them. Modern marine biologists are seeing these blooms increase in frequency and size, possibly due to climate change and ocean acidification, creating conditions that favor jellyfish over other marine life. which means you might be witnessing the ocean's response to human influence played out in living light. Researchers still argue about how jellyfish coordinate their movements and light displays across such vast distances, whether they are responding to chemical cues, electrical fields, or some other mechanism that allows thousands of individual animals to behave as a unified entity. The bloom you're drifting through represents a level of collective behavior that challenges our understanding of intelligence and consciousness. These creatures with no brains are somehow making group decisions that affect the entire population. You find yourself completely relaxed among these gentle pulsing lights. The jellyfish seem to accept your presence as they continue their synchronized dance, and you realize that floating here among these living stars is probably the closest you'll ever come to drifting through space while still remaining safely within Earth's protective embrace. You drift away from the jellyfish galaxy and into deeper waters where the pressure increases and the darkness becomes more absolute. Yet here in this seemingly barren realm, you encounter one of the ocean's most ingenious predators, an anglerfish that hovers motionless in the water with what looks like a glowing fishing lure dangling from its forehead, like nature's own version of a neon sign advertising fresh bait. You approach this bizarre creature and realize you're witnessing one of evolution's most elegant partnerships. The glowing lure isn't actually part of the anglerfish at all, but rather a colony of bioluminescent bacteria that have taken up residence in a specialized organ called an esker, creating a mutually beneficial relationship that turns the fish into a living lighthouse and the bacteria into willing accomplices in deep-sea murder. You watch as the anglerfish waves its bacterial lure through the water with movements so subtle and hypnotic that you can understand how hungry fish might mistake it for a tasty morsel of marine snow or a small bioluminescent prey animal. The bacteria pulse and flicker in patterns that perfectly mimic the light signatures of creatures that deep sea fish have evolved to recognize as food. The anglerfish provides the bacteria with nutrients and a safe place to live, while the bacteria provide a hunting tool so effective that the fish can remain perfectly motionless for hours, waiting for prey to come within striking distance of jaws that can expand to swallow animals larger than the predator's own body. The bioluminescent bacteria living in the anglerfish's lure are not just passive passengers. They actively participate in the hunt by adjusting their light output based on chemical signals from their host, dimming when the fish needs to remain hidden and brightening when prey approaches within range. It's a level of interspecies cooperation that would make any corporate partnership look dysfunctional. Two completely different forms of life working together so seamlessly that they've essentially become a single hunting machine optimized for life in the deep ocean's food desert. You observe how different species of anglerfish have evolved different bacterial partnerships, some hosting bacteria that produce a steady blue light, while others partner with microorganisms that create flashing patterns or even multiple colors, and you realize each anglerfish species has essentially recruited its own specialized lighting crew for different hunting strategies. The deep sea is like a vast dark theater where every predator needs its own lighting designer, and the bacteria have evolved to fill that role with enthusiasm that borders on artistic collaboration. The relationship between anglerfish and their bacterial tenants is so intimate that the fish actually pass the bacteria to their offspring, ensuring that each new generation is born with its own built-in hunting equipment already installed and ready to use, like inheriting your grandfather's favorite fishing rod, along with the perfect bait to go with it. Female anglerfish in some species even share their bacterial colonies with the tiny parasitic males that fuse permanently to their bodies, creating family units where everyone literally shares the same lighting system. Ancient sailors sometimes reported seeing mysterious lights moving slowly through the water at night, lights that would disappear suddenly, only to reappear somewhere else entirely, and you realize they were probably witnessing anglerfish conducting the patient hunts near the surface, the bacterial lures creating ghostly illumination that would seem supernatural to anyone who didn't understand the biological partnership responsible for the display. The idea of fish that carry their own lanterns would have seemed like pure fantasy to anyone who hadn't seen it firsthand. Researchers still argue about how anglerfish originally acquired their bacterial partners and whether this relationship evolved once and spread to different species or developed independently multiple times. But watching this perfect predator hover in the darkness with its living lure, you can appreciate that some evolutionary innovations are so successful they're worth developing repeatedly. You find yourself oddly mesmerized by the anglerfish's patience, the way it can remain absolutely motionless for what seems like hours, and you realize that observing this master of underwater meditation is slowing your own thoughts and breathing into a rhythm that matches the gentle pulse of its bacterial beacon. You continue your descent through this realm of patient predators when the sea floor reveals something that shouldn't exist, according to everything scientists thought they knew about coral reefs. Massive formations that look like underwater mushrooms, glowing with their own internal light, in depths where no coral should be able to survive. You're witnessing one of the ocean's most recent discoveries, deep-sea mushroom corals that have somehow learned to thrive in the abyssal depths without any access to sunlight, creating bioluminescent gardens in places where the pressure would crush surface corals, and the eternal darkness should make photosynthesis impossible. You drift closer to examine these impossible coral formations, and notice that their glow comes not from symbiotic algae like their shallow water cousins, but from bioluminescent bacteria that have colonized their tissues in partnerships so sophisticated they make the anglerfish bacterial relationships look simple by comparison. These corals have essentially recruited entire ecosystems of light-producing microorganisms to serve as their energy source, creating biological solar panels that run on bacterial luminescence instead of sunlight, and the result is coral gardens that glow with ethereal blue and green light in the planet's deepest places. The mushroom-shaped structures you're observing can grow to enormous sizes, some reaching diameters of several feet, their caps supported by stalks that anchor them to the sea floor like alien umbrellas, designed to catch falling marine snow instead of raindrops. The bacterial colonies living within their tissues create light patterns that pulse through the coral's translucent flesh like slow lightning, and you realize you're watching a form of photosynthesis that evolution invented specifically for the deep ocean, a process that uses bacterial bioluminescence to drive the same chemical reactions that surface corals accomplish with solar energy. You watch as small deep-sea creatures gather around these glowing coral formations like moths drawn to underwater flames, and you begin to understand that these impossible reefs serve as oases in the deep ocean desert, providing shelter and hunting grounds for species that have nowhere else to gather in the vast emptiness of the abyssal plains. The corals are essentially creating their own ecosystems through light, attracting prey animals that the corals can capture and digest, while simultaneously providing habitat for fish and crustaceans that have evolved to live only in the glow of these bacterial coral gardens. The discovery of these deep-sea coral reefs happened almost by accident when deep ocean submersibles, exploring for entirely different purposes, encountered glowing formations that didn't match anything in the scientific literature, and marine biologists are still trying to understand how these creatures managed to build calcium carbonate skeletons in water so acidic and cold that it should dissolve coral structures faster than they can be constructed. The mushroom corals you're observing represent a completely new approach to reef building, one that works in environmental conditions that would kill surface reefs within hours. The bacterial partnerships that power these deep coral gardens are so complex that each coral hosts dozens of different bacterial species, each one specialized for different functions, like a microscopic city where some bacteria produce light, others process nutrients, and still others manufacture the chemical compounds the coral needs to build and maintain its skeleton. It's like watching a biological version of a modern factory where every worker is a different species and the product is a living reef that glows in the darkness of the deep ocean. Researchers still argue about how these deep-sea corals originally acquired their bacterial partners and whether similar coral bacteria partnerships might exist in other deep ocean locations that haven't been explored yet. But the formations you're witnessing suggest that life finds ways to create complexity and beauty even in Earth's most challenging environments. You find yourself wondering how many other impossible ecosystems might be glowing quietly in unexplored corners of the deep ocean, coral gardens and bacterial cities conducting their luminous business in places where humans have never thought to look. And the thought fills you with a sense of wonder that makes the crushing depths around you feel less like an alien world and more like a secret garden that Earth has been tending in darkness for millions of years. You begin to ascend from the glowing coral gardens toward the surface world, following the same path that marine snow takes in reverse, when the water around you suddenly transforms into something that looks like liquid starlight, every movement you make triggering cascades of blue-white luminescence that spread outward in expanding rings of light. You've encountered one of the ocean's rarest and most spectacular phenomena, a bioluminescent tidal wave where massive populations of dinoflagellates have been stirred into a frenzy by storm waves, creating conditions where entire coastlines can light up like neon whenever the surf crashes against the shore. You find yourself swimming through water so densely packed with bioluminescent organisms that every stroke of your arms creates trails of light that linger for seconds before fading, and you realize you're experiencing something that maybe a few dozen people in human history have witnessed firsthand. The ocean transformed into a living aurora that responds to touch and movement with displays that would make any fireworks show look pale and ordinary. The dinoflagellates around you are flashing not in the coordinated patterns you observed earlier, but in chaotic bursts triggered by the mechanical disturbance of waves and currents, creating a storm of light that mirrors the turbulent water above. The phenomenon you are witnessing occurs when several factors align perfectly. Massive dinoflagellate blooms must coincide with storm conditions that churn the surface waters, and the timing has to be just right for the organisms to be at peak density and maximum light-producing capability. It's like winning the biological lottery, except instead of money you get an entire ocean that glows with every wave, and the prize is a light show that can be seen from aircraft flying thousands of feet overhead, turning the normal darkness of night seas into something that looks more like an alien planet than Earth. You watch as waves above you crash and tumble, each one triggering explosions of bioluminescence that cascade down through the water column like underwater fireworks, and you understand why ancient mariners who encountered these events often reported seas that burned with cold fire or waters that seemed to be filled with liquid lightning. The intensity of light being produced around you is actually measurable from satellites in space. These bioluminescent tidal events create signatures so bright they show up in orbital photography as glowing patches along coastlines. The energy expenditure involved in what you are witnessing is staggering. Billions upon billions of dinoflagellates are simultaneously burning their stored chemical energy to produce light, essentially conducting the largest coordinated light show on Earth using nothing but single-celled organisms and the mechanical energy of storm waves. Each flash represents a microscopic organism making the decision that creating light is more important than conserving energy for reproduction or growth, and the collective result is an ocean that has temporarily transformed into a living constellation. You notice how the bioluminescent displays change as you move through different densities of organisms, some areas producing steady glows, while others create strobing patterns that pulse with the rhythm of the waves above, and you realize you're witnessing the ocean's own version of a music visualizer, where the music is the sound of crashing waves, and the visualization is created by countless microscopic light producers responding to the vibrations. The ancient practice of night fishing in bioluminescent waters makes perfect sense now. Any fish swimming through this glowing soup would light up like a neon sign and become incredibly easy to spot and catch. Researchers still argue about what triggers these massive bioluminescent events and whether they are becoming more or less common due to changing ocean conditions. But floating here in water that responds to your every movement with cascades of living light, you can appreciate that some natural phenomena are so spectacular they transcend scientific understanding and become pure magic. The storm-driven bioluminescence around you is beginning to calm as you drift away from the turbulent surface waters, but the memory of swimming through liquid starlight will probably haunt your dreams in the most beautiful way possible, and you find yourself wondering if this is what it would feel like to swim through the Milky Way if galaxies were made of water instead of the vacuum, and stars were replaced by microscopic organisms that paint with light whenever the universe moves around them. You drift upward from the bioluminescent storm into calmer waters where the light displays become more subtle and organized, and as you pause in this transitions zone between the chaotic surface brilliance and the deeper mysteries you've explored, you begin to understand that everything you've witnessed is connected by invisible threads of communication that span the entire ocean. The glowing rain of marine snow connects the surface phytoplankton blooms to the deep-sea coral gardens. The dinoflagellates that create defensive light shows feed the jellyfish galaxies that drift through bacterial communication networks, and the anglerfish that hunt with living lures contribute to the same ecosystem that supports the ancient vampire squids dancing through their bioluminescent theater. You realize you've been swimming through the ocean's memory, a vast network of chemical and light-based communication that has been operating for billions of years, long before complex brains evolved to process information or nervous systems developed to coordinate behavior. The bioluminescent displays you've witnessed aren't just pretty light shows. They're the ocean's way of thinking, a distributed intelligence that uses living creatures as neurons and chemical signals as thoughts, creating a form of consciousness so vast and alien that humans have barely begun to recognize its existence. The bacterial colonies you observed coordinating their lights across miles of sea floor are essentially the ocean's long-term memory, storing and transmitting information about environmental conditions, nutrient availability, and seasonal changes through light patterns that persist for decades or centuries. The jellyfish blooms that flash in synchronized waves are like the ocean's emotional responses, massive coordinated reactions to changes in temperature, chemistry, or food supply that ripple through entire ecosystems with the speed of living light. You begin to see how the dinoflagellate's defensive flashing serves as the ocean's nervous system, instantly transmitting information about threats and opportunities through networks of bioluminescent organisms that span entire ocean basins, while the anglerfish and their bacterial partners represent the ocean's focused attention, concentrated predatory intelligence that can wait motionless for hours before striking with perfect precision. The deep sea coral gardens, glowing with their impossible bacterial partnerships, are like the ocean's dreams, impossible beautiful creations that exist in places where logic says they shouldn't survive. The bioluminescent tidal waves you swam through represent the ocean's most intense communications, moments when the entire marine communication network becomes so active that it breaks through to the surface world and becomes visible even to land-dwelling creatures like humans, who normally can't perceive the constant light-based conversations happening beneath the waves. These events are the ocean's way of shouting, using storm energy to amplify its bioluminescent voice until it can be heard by satellites in space and witnessed by anyone fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time. Ancient cultures that lived close to the sea often developed mythologies about ocean spirits and underwater gods who communicated through mysterious lights, and now you understand they were probably witnessing fragments of this vast bioluminescent communication network, glimpses of the ocean's intelligence that they interpreted through the lens of their own understanding. The Aboriginal Australians spoke of ancestor spirits that lived in the sea and sent messages through glowing waters. Pacific Island cultures developed elaborate stories about underwater kingdoms that communicated through light, and even modern scientists are just beginning to appreciate the sophistication of the communication systems you've been observing. Researchers still argue about whether the ocean's bioluminescent networks constitute a form of planetary intelligence, whether the chemical and light-based communication systems you've witnessed represent a type of consciousness that operates on scales and timelines so vast that human minds can barely comprehend the scope. The marine snow that connects surface productivity to deep-sea ecosystems, remember those glowing particles falling like underwater stars, carries not just nutrients but information about seasonal changes, climate patterns, and the health of surface waters, creating a communication system that links every part of the ocean from the brightest shallows to the darkest depths. You find yourself floating in the gentle transition zone between the surface light and the deep mysteries, surrounded by the subtle bioluminescent communications of creatures going about their eternal business. And you realize that you've been privileged to witness something profound, the ocean's own version of consciousness expressed through living light. As you slowly drift toward the surface, the bioluminescent displays around you begin to fade into softer, more distant glows, like stars gradually dimming as dawn approaches, in a world where dawn never comes. The frantic flashing of the storm-stirred dinoflagellates settles into gentle pulses. The jellyfish galaxies disperse into scattered individuals, drifting on currents that know no hurry, and the deep communication networks below fade into the patient darkness where they will continue their ancient conversations long after you've returned to the dry land above. The pressure around you lessens gradually, and you can feel the vast weight of water above becoming somehow lighter, more welcoming, as if the ocean itself is gently releasing you from its deepest secrets, while allowing you to carry their memory back to the surface world. The bioluminescent creatures that shared their light with you continue their eternal dances in the depths, their living constellations pulsing with rhythms older than continents, steady as the heartbeat of the planet itself. You carry with you now the knowledge that beneath every dark ocean surface, invisible networks of living light are conducting conversations in languages of chemical signals and bioluminescent flashes, that the sea holds memories in bacterial colonies that glow with the accumulated wisdom of billions of years, and that somewhere in the deepest places, impossible coral gardens are blooming in darkness, tended by partnerships between creatures so different they seem like aliens collaborating across the boundaries of biology itself. The gentle rhythm of your ascent matches the slow pulse of the marine world below, and as the faint glow of surface light begins to appear far above, you understand that you will always carry a piece of the ocean's luminous consciousness within you, a memory of swimming through liquid starlight in a realm where every living thing speaks in the universal language of light, where the boundary between individual and ecosystem dissolves into something larger and more beautiful than either could achieve alone. Sweet dreams, and may your rest be filled with the gentle glow of bioluminescent wonders drifting through the peaceful darkness of sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.